The emergency room at Mercy General was a machine that never stopped breathing, monitors beeping in syncopated rhythm, the squeak of rubber soles on polished linoleum, the mechanical hiss of oxygen flowing through plastic tubes. But tonight, something had broken the machine's rhythm. Trauma Bay 7 had become a war zone, glass scattered across the floor like shattered stars. And every member of the security team was frozen in the hallway, staring at the man who had turned their sterile sanctuary into a kill box. He was backed into the corner, an apex predator wounded but still lethal. His black shirt was soaked through with blood, the fabric clinging to his torso like a second skin painted crimson. In his right hand, he gripped a jagged piece of broken IV pole, the metal sharp enough to open throats. Blood dripped steadily from a gunshot wound just below his ribs, pooling on the white tile, but his eyes burned with a clarity that made 3 armed guards hesitate at the threshold. Eye high, wasn't fading. He was calculating. Dr. Morrison, the attending physician, was screaming orders that nobody followed. His face had gone purple with rage and panic, his authority crumbling against the raw violence radiating from inside that room. "Taser him! Put him down before he bleeds out on my floor." Morrison's voice cracked like breaking glass. The man swung the metal shard in a vicious arc, a guttural warning exploding from his throat in a language that nobody recognized. It wasn't madness. It was a promise. Zara stood at the medication cart, her dark green scrubs making her almost invisible in the shadowed alcove. She was 27, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen humanity stripped down to its bones long before she ever wore a hospital badge. She watched the scene with a stillness that felt unnatural against the chaos vibrating through the department. Her assessment was instant and tactical. The man wasn't psychotic. He was cornered. The guards were, posturing, hands hovering near their weapons, terrified of the lethality that poured off him in waves. Zara saw what they didn't. The way he protected his left side, the defensive angle of his body, the fact that he was using the glass wall's reflection to track movement behind him. He wasn't attacking. He was fortifying a position. "Stand down," Zara said, her voice low but cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. She moved past Dr. Morrison, ignoring his sputtered protest. "Nurse, do not enter that room. That's a direct order." Zara shook off his grabbing hand without breaking stride, her eyes locked on the man in Trauma 7. "He's going into hypovolemic shock, doctor. If you tase him now, the cardiac stress will stop his heart. I'm going in." The silence that fell when Zara pushed open the glass door was absolute. Inside, the air tasted like copper and fear. The man, whose intake papers listed him only as John Doe, though his tailored suit whispered of organized crime at the highest level, whipped the metal shard toward her face. "Stay back," he rasped in heavily accented English, his chest heaving. Blood dripped in a steady rhythm from the wound, spreading across the floor in a dark mirror. Zara stopped exactly 3 feet away, raising her empty hands slowly, palms open. She didn't look at the weapon. She looked directly into his eyes, which were dilated with pain and adrenaline. Then she saw it, a tattoo crawling out from beneath his blood-soaked collar, a stylized serpent coiled around a dagger, the ink slightly faded at the edges. It was a mark she hadn't seen since her time working the unauthorized clinics in the port cities of Busan, a brand of loyalty that belonged to ghost stories in the underworld. "You're losing the fight," Zara said softly, her voice steady. "And the enemy killing you isn't me. It's gravity. Let me stop the bleeding." The man's jaw clenched. "No doctors, no police. They're already inside this building." Zara understood then that his paranoia wasn't delusion. It was survival instinct. He wasn't afraid of treatment. He was afraid of being pinned down when the hunters arrived. The stalemate hung between them, fragile and deadly. In seconds, the guards would rush him, and he would die fighting or die bleeding. Either way, he would die. Zara took a breath and pulled something from the locked drawer of her memory. a phrase she had learned years ago in a basement clinic, where the lights flickered and the doors had no locks. It was a shibboleth, a code meant to identify sanctuary in a world of wolves. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper only he could hear. "The serpent coils when the fire rises," she said in flawless Korean. The effect was immediate. His eyes widened, the feral rage fracturing into confusion and desperate recognition. The weapon wavered in his grip. It was a specific phrase, archaic and secret, used by the old syndicates to identify neutral ground. He stared at her, searching her face for betrayal, but finding only calm resolve. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm the one keeping you alive until the fire dies," Zara replied, switching back to English but keeping her tone intimate. "Drop the metal. Give me your hand." The transition was a blur. The man, whom she would come to know as Kang Minho, collapsed forward, adrenaline finally surrendering to blood loss. Zara caught him, her frame straining under his weight as she guided him onto the gurney. "I need a crash cart, 2 units O negative, and a trauma kit now," she shouted, snapping the frozen staff back into motion. As she cut away his ruined shirt, exposing the ragged entry wound, Minho's hand shot out and gripped her wrist with impossible strength. His fingers were cold, but his grip burned. "Don't log me in," he gasped, his eyes fighting to stay focused on hers. "The system is watching." Zara paused, the scanner hovering over his wristband. She glanced at the monitor. His pressure was crashing, 80/48. If she logged him into the hospital network, his location would ping every agency in the city. If he was right, if he was being hunted from the inside, a digital footprint was a death sentence. She looked at Dr. Morrison, who was distracted by a pileup in the waiting area, then back at Minho. The vulnerability in his face stripped away the gangster exterior, leaving only a man terrified of dying alone in a fluorescent tomb. It triggered something fierce and protective in her, something that went beyond her oath. She dropped the scanner. "Off the books," she whispered, leaning close as she pressed gauze into the wound. "But you stay with me. You don't get to die." A grim, pained smile touched his lips. "I'm hard to kill." The intimacy was sharp and sudden, her hands inside his body, his life dependent entirely on her discretion. As she worked, packing the wound and clamping vessels, the air between them charged with something electric and dangerous. They weren't patient and nurse anymore. They were co-conspirators. "My name is Minho," he gasped as the morphine began to take hold. "Zara," she replied without looking up, suturing quickly. "And you talk too much." 20 minutes later, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sound, but a change in pressure, a ripple of silence spreading from the entrance inward. Zara was washing blood from her hands when she saw them through the blinds. 2 men in dark suits, moving with predatory efficiency, flashing badges but lacking the bored indifference of real police. They scanned the room like they were clearing sectors, not looking for patients. Cleaners, Zara thought coldly. Minho had been right. She dried her hands and returned to his bedside. He was awake, instincts dragging him out of sedation. He saw the tension in her shoulders before she spoke. "They're here," he stated. 2 men, main entrance. They're sweeping the bays," Zara said quietly, unlocking the gurney wheels. "They don't look like they're here for paperwork." Minho tried to sit up, groaning as fresh sutures pulled tight. "Leave me. If they find you with me, they'll burn this place down." Zara looked at him. Really looked. He was a criminal, a man whose ledger of sins was probably longer than her career. But in this room, under her care, he was a human being who had trusted her when he trusted no one. And there was something else, a spark in how he looked at her, a desperate gratitude that terrified her more than the men with guns. "I don't abandon my patients," Zara said, grabbing surgical shears and sliding them into her pocket. "And I definitely don't let people get executed in my trauma bay." She killed the lights, plunging them into semi-darkness. We move now. They navigated the service corridors, the hum of ventilation masking the sound of the gurney's wheels. Zara moved through the hospital's labyrinth like she lived there, guiding them toward the freight elevators, used for bio-waste and laundry. Mino lay still, one hand pressed over his bandaged side, the other gripping the gurney rail, his eyes scanning ceiling mirrors and blind corners. "You're very good at this," he whispered through the pain. "Too good for a nurse." Zara didn't look back, her focus entirely on the corridor ahead. "I learned to triage in places where hospitals were the first targets. You move fast or you don't move at all." They reached the elevator. Zara hammered the call button. The wait felt like drowning. Suddenly, the PA system crackled. "Code Silver, lockdown in effect. All personnel remain in designated areas." The voice was calm, automated, and chilling. The hunters had triggered a lockdown to trap them. The elevator dinged, the sound deafening in the quiet. As the door slid open, Zara pushed the gurney inside, but a heavy boot slammed into the gap, stopping them. She spun, scalpel in hand, placing herself between Minho and the threat. One of the men from the Yiddish lobby stood there, suppressor already threaded onto his pistol, a polite smile on his dead face. "Nurse," the man said smoothly, raising the weapon. "Step away from the asset. This doesn't concern you." Behind her, Minho shifted. He wasn't cowering. He was preparing to fight. "It concerns me," Zara said, her voice shaking but her hand steady. "When you bring a gun into my house." She slammed her fist into the fire alarm panel. The klaxon screamed to life, a deafening roar of strobing lights and noise. The assassin flinched for a fraction of a second. Zara shoved the crash cart she dragged with them, ramming it into his chest with all her strength. He stumbled back, the gun firing wild into the ceiling tiles, and the elevator doors ground shut. They were alive, but now they were trapped in a metal box descending into darkness. The elevator groaned as it lowered them into the hospital's basement. Red emergency strobes pulsed against steel walls, turning the cabin into a cage of blood and shadow. Zara was on her knees beside the gurney before the doors fully closed, her hands flying over Minho's abdomen. The crash cart collision had torn something. Fresh bright blood seeped through the dressing. "You tore the stitch," she hissed, pressing down hard with her body weight. Minho didn't wince. He watched her, eyes glassy, but fixated on her face with unnerving intensity. "Better the stitch than your throat," he murmured, his hand weakly gripping her forearm. His skin burned with fever. "You saved me back there. Why?" Zara looked up, locking eyes with him. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her trembling, but his grip was an anchor. "Because I'm a nurse," she said, though it felt insufficient for the violence she'd just committed. "And because you looked like you were waiting for someone to finally be on your side." The elevator jolted to a halt at the sublevel. Morgue, laundry, boiler rooms. The doors opened onto a dimly lit corridor smelling of industrial bleach and damp concrete. Zara pushed the gurney out, wheels echoing on cement. This was the building's circulatory system, a maze of steam pipes and utility tunnels where the public never went. "We need a car," Zara whispered, scanning faded signage. "Waste management dock is at the end of the east tunnel. Trucks arrive at 4 a.m. That's 8 minutes. Minho tried to sit up, his movements ragged. "They'll know. They're professionals. They'll cover the exits." He coughed, a wet rattling sound. "Leave me here. Hide yourself." Zara stopped the gurney, grabbing his face in both hands, forcing him to look at her. The contact was electric, a sudden breach that felt inevitable. "Listen to me. I just assaulted a gunman and hijacked an elevator. I'm already burned. The only way I survive is if you survive. We leave together." They moved deeper into the labyrinth, temperature rising near the boiler room. The air grew thick and humid, steam valve hissing masking their movement. Zara's mind raced, calculating routes. She knew this basement better than security. She knew which doors jammed, which corridors were camera blind spots. But professionals didn't need maps. They needed lines of sight. Suddenly, Minho's hand tightened on her wrist. Stop! Zara froze. At first, nothing. Then she heard it, the wet crunch of a boot on concrete, the soft sweep of fabric against a wall. They were close, not behind them, ahead. They'd flanked the basement. To their left was a heavy steel door marked Biohazard Storage, authorized personnel only. It was their only option. Zara keyed the code, her fingers slipping on blood, and shoved the gurney inside. The maglock engaged with a heavy thud just as a shadow detached from the darkness down the hall. Inside, it was pitch black until motion sensors triggered a low amber safety light. The room was stacked with red plastic bins and yellow barrels. Zara pushed the gurney behind stacked crates, sliding to the floor beside Minho. They were huddled in cramped space, knees touching, the smell of antiseptic and iron surrounding them. Minho's breathing was shallow, his energy fading. Zara checked the wound. Bleeding had slowed, but his pulse was thready. She pulled a saline bag from the crash cart, rigging a makeshift gravity drip by hanging it on a shelf. Stay with me, she whispered, her hand on his chest, monitoring each breath. Don't you dare quit. Minho turned his head, his cheek resting against her hand. The gesture was impossibly intimate, stripping away the context of pursuit. You spoke the language of the old families, he whispered, voice barely audible. The code you used, the serpent coils when the fire rises. My grandfather used to say that. He looked at her, dark eyes searching hers in amber light. Who are you, Zara? A nurse doesn't move like a soldier. I grew up in places where the lines between soldier and civilian were erased. Zara answered softly, her thumb brushing sweat from his temple. The moment, suspended, the threat outside forgotten for a heartbeat. There was magnetic pull between them, born of survival and something deeper, recognition of shared scars. I learned that life is fragile, she continued, voice trembling slightly. And sometimes you break the rules to keep the flame burning. Minho reached up, his fingers tracing her jaw, leaving a faint streak of his blood on her skin like war paint. You're dangerous, he murmured, a faint smile touching his lips. If we live, I'll owe you a debt that can't be paid with money. Zara leaned closer, their foreheads almost touching. The air between them was thick with unsaid things, tension both terrified and tender. If we live, she whispered back, you can tell me why you have a serpent on your chest and a target on your back. The moment shattered. The electronic lock beeped. Someone was overriding the code. Zara's head snapped toward the door. The red light turned green. They're in, she breathed. Minho's eyes hardened. Instantly, the lover vanished. The boss returned. He spotted a tray of instruments on the crashed cart. He reached out, hand shaking but grip firm, taking a long scalpel. Get behind me, he ordered, trying to push himself upright despite agony. Zara pushed him back down. No, you can't stand. She grabbed a pressurized disinfectant canister from the shelf and a lighter from her pocket, a desperate improvised weapon, but all she had. Stay low. The door swung open. A silhouette with a raised weapon filled the frame. He stepped in, weapon light cutting through amber gloom. Clear left, a voice said it into a radio. Zara didn't wait. She screamed, a raw, distractionary sound, and hurled a heavy biohazard bin at the intruder. He instinctively swung his weapon toward motion, firing a suppressed shot that punched through plastic. In that split second, Zara triggered the lighter in front of the spray nozzle. A roaring tongue of flame erupted across the small room, a makeshift flamethrower, engulfing the gunman's upper body. He shouted, flailing back into the hallway, blinding his partner. Move! Zara yelled, grabbing the gurney, but Minho was already moving. Adrenaline flooded his system, overriding shock. He rolled off the gurney, landing on his feet with a groan. He grabbed the dropped pistol from where the burning man had fallen, his movements fluid despite injury. He fired 2 controlled shots, double taps into the corridor darkness, suppressing the second shooter. Go, he roared. grabbing Zara's hand with his free one, pulling her toward the rear exit leading to the loading dock. They burst into cool, damp night air. Rain fell in heavy sheets, washing away smoke and fear. The sudden temperature drop made Zara shiver, her scrubs soaked instantly. They were out, but exposed. A black sedan screeched around the corner, tires smoking on wet pavement. Zara flinched, pulling Minho back, but he held ground. "It's mine," he said breathlessly, leaning against the concrete wall. The window rolled down, revealing a driver with the same serpent tattoo on his neck. Cavalry had arrived, too late to save them inside, just in time to extract them. Minho turned to Zara, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. He looked at the open car door, then back at her. Sirens rose in the distance. Police, fire, real authorities. He couldn't be here when they arrived. She couldn't be seen getting into that car. "You have to stay," Minho said, the realization paining him more than the gunshot. "If you come with me, you never come back. You become a ghost." Zara looked at the car, then at the hospital where her life lived. Then she looked at him. The connection still burned brighter in the rain. She stepped closer, grabbing the lapels of his ruined shirt. "You're bleeding through the packing," she said, voice choking. "You need surgery." Minho shook his head, sad smile on his face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a heavy silver ring with a family crest stained with blood. He pressed it into her palm, closing her fingers over it. "I have doctors who don't ask questions, but I don't have this." He leaned down, forehead resting against hers for 1 second, a promise of intimacy defying chaos around them. "This isn't over, Zara. When the fire dies, I'll find you." He pulled away, sliding into the back seat. The door slammed shut, severing connection. The car sped into the rainy night, taillights dissolving into mist. Zara stood alone in the loading dock, rain mixing with blood on her hands. Sirens were deafening now, blue and red lights bouncing off wet pavements, sweeping over her. She looked at her hand. The silver ring was cold and heavy against her skin. She clenched her fist around it, hiding it as the first police cruiser skidded to a halt. Dr. Morrison ran from the ER entrance, spotting her. "Zara, my God, are you okay? What happened? Where's the patient?" Zara took a deep breath, slipping the ring into her pocket, her face shifting into a mask of professional shock. She looked at the empty space where the car had been, then back at the doctor. "He overpowered me," she lied, voice steady and convincing. "He ran into the dark. I couldn't stop him." But as she walked back toward the hospital lights, her hand stayed in her pocket, thumb tracing the engraved serpent on metal, knowing the fire would die, and the serpent would return.